Well, again, welcome to everyone this morning, and especially to our new Kriya initiates. Like Shivani was saying last night, we've seen over the years at Ananda Village that whenever there is a Kriya initiation, people who don't attend, people who just live on the grounds there, invariably comment about what a deep feeling of blessing there was that evening. And part of the reason is that Yoganandaji said that he came for two reasons. One was to bring the teachings of the scriptures and his particular interpretations of East and West, Bible and Bhagavad Gita, and to bring Kriya Yoga. And whenever people come and make this serious commitment to spend this year working with the other techniques and bring themselves to this point where they're ready for initiation, you're in a sense fulfilling Yogananda's mission and the reason that he came. And he is very, very pleased. And this is why Kriya initiation is also a sacred evening, because the gurus, you're fulfilling their mission in a sense. In another sense, this is just the beginning of another chapter in your journey, because it's now about how you use these sacred tools, which we'll be talking about this morning. And so the masters are very, very pleased when they see people coming to learn Kriya Yoga and having made the commitment to do what is necessary. Now, a lot of the things that Shivani and I will be talking about today really apply to any true spiritual teaching. So those who are on the path of Kriya, these things are universal principles of the spiritual path. And for those who are learning Kriya, about to learn it, who practice it, these principles especially give us the understanding on how to get the most from the path of Kriya Yoga. People often ask, well, the Kriya technique, I read about it in Autobiography of a Yogi. I want it right now. If it's so good, give it to me and I'll start progressing spiritually, because Yoganandaji did say that the Kriya technique is the greatest tool of salvation ever given to mankind. And so people do want it right away. Understandably, I wanted it right away when I read Autobiography of a Yogi. It's the first thing I wanted was Kriya Yoga. Then, of course, I understood that one, it's part of a comprehensive spiritual path, the way our Guru gave it to us. And two, it's a tool. It's not a magic potion that you just do it mechanically and it works. In a way, it's almost like someone walking into an operating room at a hospital and giving them the best scalpel in the world, putting it in their hand and saying, go at it. And anybody who had wisdom would understand, oh, wait a minute, I need to learn how to use this tool first. I need the training, I need the understanding of anatomy, what to do with it. And I think most people would probably react that way rather than causing harm. And I've seen this actually with people who learn Kriya either just in one weekend or through the internet or wherever they pick it up really quickly. It's not that it causes harm, except in one way, which I'll explain. It's more that it doesn't work for them because they don't know how to use it. They don't have the intuition, the training with the other techniques, the guru-disciple relationship, which is what we're going to be talking about this morning. But they also just don't have a good experience of it. And because they don't experience anything, they drop it and they think, Kriya Yoga, Shmiya Yoga, this stuff doesn't work at all for me. And it could be lifetimes before that thought form gets out of their mind and they come back to the path of Kriya Yoga and learn it in the right way. So the right way is what we're talking about today. And I'm going to start and then finish my part of this talk with early on, I've been working with the Ananda Kriya Sangha for about 10 years in this incarnation, and I also did it a little bit in the 1980s. And I want to correct something that has been happening when I'm introduced. I'm not the director of the worldwide Kriya Sangha, I'm just the director of Kriya Sangha North and South America. Swami Kriyanandaji, in his infinite wisdom, he really gave Ananda a way of working that was very decentralized. And so we have, Kriya work here, and it's directed by the Kriya teachers in India and in Europe, the leaders in Europe direct it. And it's the same essential teachings, but different cultures and different natures need a different emphasis and an approach. And so there is no worldwide Kriya Sangha, although I have traveled all over the world to our different centers everywhere to share Kriya Yoga. One of the great blessings of doing this is that starting in the 80s when I did it for a while, and in the last 10 years. I've had the blessing and opportunity to work with probably hundreds and some thousand Kriya yogis, watched them receive Kriya, seen them a few years later, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years later. I've been in touch with them, and I've had the chance to observe what produces the best results with Kriya. Because Swami Kriyanandaji, over the years, many times, he said that Kriya Yoga as a technique is not mechanical in the way that it produces results. And it's really, really helpful to sort of burn that thought into our brains, that Kriya Yoga is not mechanical in the way that it works. And he would often describe Kriya as both an art and a science. And the art and science of Kriya, when you combine these two together, really have an extraordinary power. And this is where I've seen Kriya yogis make extraordinary spiritual gains in years, in one lifetime. And we have seen many instances of Ananda people learning Kriya Yoga and dedicating their whole life to it, 30, 40 years. And then when it came time to leave the body, invariably, and I would say without exception, people have an extraordinary amount of freedom. And this is what our Guru said. He said, if you practice Kriya to the end of life, and deeper and faithful and true to it and really work at it, he said, in the end, you will have divine freedom and the masters will come to take you home. And I believe that we have seen this proven time and time again. The best way to test any theory, any teaching, is to see the results. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. I don't know if that's an expression here in India, but the proof is in the results. And one of the great blessings of working with so many people is, one, seeing these extraordinary results, but two, also seeing what it is that produces the best results, and what attitudes, what approaches, what other lifestyle changes all work together to make Kriya Yoga an extraordinary teaching. Yoganandaji did something very unusual that I've seen over the years, and I think many Ananda people take it for granted, and it's the way he combined technique and science with devotion. And it's very, very unusual, because as I've been introduced to other spiritual teachings over the years, nearly always they emphasize one or the other. Bhakti yogi is the path to find God, or self-help and doing a lot of asanas and purifications and becoming godlike by purifying yourself so much. And it's usually one or the other. Often you'll see both, but even then you'll see that at one time people practice their techniques and the other time they practice their devotion. But Yoganandaji brought these two together in a real marriage, in combination of the two, also combined with the guru-disciple relationship. Early on, when I started doing the Kriya Sangha this time, about 10 years ago, I found that I was receiving a very, very common question from people. And that question was, which is the best Kriya? Because you go online now and you see all these claims about our Kriya is the best Kriya, this is the original, authentic, only Kriya, and you see a lot of spiritual infighting and dogmatism, and it's unfortunate, but any religion will get some of that approach. And I discovered when people ask that question, my answer from the beginning was very simple. There's only one right Kriya Yoga. It's not our Kriya Yoga with thumping the Bible and that. There's only one right Kriya Yoga, and that's the one that your Guru gives to you, because it is an integral part of the Guru-disciple relationship. And for us, Paramahansa Yoganandaji is the Kriya Guru. And so he taught Kriya the way that we teach it. This is why we teach it the way we do, because we're his disciples. And this is his approach of teaching Kriya Yoga, not just as a singular technique, but as a comprehensive spiritual path. And that really is what you will discover produces really the great results when you practice Kriya Yoga. If you see Kriya as much more than the singular technique, but as a whole package deal that includes many of the things we'll be talking about today. Swami Kriyanandaji, again, he often described the path of Kriya as both an art and a science. And it's very interesting and almost humorous to me that Paramahansa Yoganandaji, he, in describing the way that Kriya is also an art, he defined it and described it with two mathematical formulas. It's a funny juxtaposition because these two mathematical formulas sort of describe how Kriya is an art. And I encourage all Kriya yogis to remember these two formulas, even if you're math challenged. These are two very simple formulas, and if you remember these all the time and apply them to your spiritual path, again, whether it's the path of Kriya Yoga or any true spiritual teaching, you'll find that these two formulas will help guide you when you start stumbling or struggling, or if you just want to go further with it. You will find that these approaches, defining and describing Kriya as an art, are extremely helpful and very important. The first one is that our Guru said that any success on the spiritual path is 25% our effort, 25% the Guru's effort on our behalf, 50% the grace of God. And I have found that in my own practice, that when I feel myself struggling spiritually and bogging down, which I think happens to everybody at one time or another, if I go back to that formula and ask, okay, which part of that formula am I not doing correctly? Sometimes we need more self-effort, discipline, focus, regularity of practices. Sometimes we need more attunement and devotion and discipleship to the Guru. Sometimes we just need purely more devotion and practicing these things not as a mechanical practice, but as a devotional one. So remember that one formula. The other formula is as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. Yogananda Ji said that Kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. And I'm told that Swamiji once said that Kriya without devotion is not Kriya. And so this is the art and the whole package of the path of Kriya Yoga. And when the path of Kriya Yoga is applied in this way, this is where I've seen people getting the most results. I had a very interesting experience about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was with a student that was practicing Kriya. It was a very enlightening educational thing for me because it really demonstrated these principles very good. This man came to receive Kriya initiation at Ananda Village, and he was in his 80s, which is, I'm always inspired when people in their 80s learn Kriya Yoga. I've seen a few of them, and I've seen people make extraordinary gains, even late in life, when they really apply themselves. And it's very interesting and inspiring to see that. But this man, when he was young, he was an Olympic swimmer, and he had made the United States Olympic team as a swimmer. This was probably around the late 40s or something. And then just before the Olympics started, he contracted polio, and it prevented him from going to the Olympics. And he recovered well from the polio, but then in old age, he also got some secondary polio symptoms, which often happen, and it affected his lungs. And so breathing was very, very difficult for him. And he received initiation. He was obviously sincere and dedicated. There was no doubt about that. The next morning when I checked and listened to him practice Kriya Yoga, because his lungs were so damaged, what he was doing was not even recognizable as being close to what you would say was the Kriya technique. And so I encouraged him to do his best, to work with his breathing. But I was thinking in the back of my mind, well, this is tough. I mean, this is a tough karma to have. I wonder how much he's really going to get from this technique if he can't practice it properly. Well, a year later, he visited Ananda Village and I saw him. You could see that he was transformed by his practices. There was more light, more joy, energy, clarity, enthusiasm, which is somewhat unusual at that age. You don't usually look younger and better when you're in your 80s, but he did. And I asked him how his Kriya practice was going, and he said, oh, it's just going so well. It's so inspiring, and this has been so helpful. And so he asked me to check his Kriyas again, and I listened and I checked, and they were just as bad as they were the year before. There was just no way that he could physically do the technique of Kriya properly. And it was so interesting to me to see that, because it proves something, which is that obviously that 25% doesn't mean doing things perfectly. It does mean the 100% of our effort, and I think Shivani will be talking about this. It's 100% of our effort. Here was a man who had the focus, the dedication, the willpower, the energy of an Olympic athlete. And he obviously was applying that the best he could, which physically was not very much because of his lungs. And so it really taught me something, which is that, as Swamiji said, it really affirmed what he said, that Kriya is not mechanical in its results. This doesn't mean that we can all slack off and the Guru is going to do it for me and I don't have to really try very hard. And that is also not true. He was obviously trying his darn best to practice the Kriya technique, but he was also doing it with a sense of devotion and attunement to the Guru. Sometime about a year later, Swamiji confirmed this for me. He said something very interesting. He was filming some TV shows for Indian television over at the Crystal Hermitage at Ananda Village. And there were just a few of us there in the audience. And I think he said this partly for my benefit because it was such a key teaching on the path of Kriya Yoga. And he said techniques such as Kriya are secondary to attunement and discipleship to the Guru. Now, I hope I'm not deflating everybody's balloon here by saying techniques such as Kriya are secondary. In fact, what we've seen for disciples of Yogananda, that the practice of Kriya, the practice of these techniques, is part of our discipleship and part of our attunement. But what Swamiji was saying is that attunement to the Guru, devotion to the Guru, receptivity to the Guru's teachings is really in the end what takes us there. And we'll talk more about this tomorrow because we're celebrating Yoganandaji's birthday tomorrow with a satsang here. But what he was saying is that it's not about techniques. It's about, again, the whole package, because for us as disciples of Yoganandaji, he gave us Kriya Yoga, he gave us a particular package of things. And the Hari Mahashaya actually said that when you practice the Kriya techniques, in that practice, in that sincere practice, you actually attract the blessings and the grace of the Guru. And so, again, it's a whole package, but our part simply is to do our very best. And part of our very best is this whole dance, this whole art of practicing all these teachings in cooperation with the Guru. And I had a very sort of good, striking analogy of how this works. Some years ago, I was in Rishikesh, and I was on pilgrimage, and I was meditating with a friend on the banks of the Ganges, and it was a very quiet day. It was probably the only time I've ever been in India, and I was by myself. And I didn't see crowds of people because we were on a very, very remote beach. And early in the morning, we were doing our Kriya practice. And after Kriya, I went out to bathe in the Ganges, as we all do when we were there. And I had a very interesting experience, which is that about maybe 15 feet out, and the water was about this deep, I suddenly plunged into quicksand. And I have a very funny karma with God and nature. I've been in quicksand before, and I've been hit by lightning, and had a rock hit me on the mountaintop and just send me tumbling down, and I had to get airlifted off of the mountain. And there's more than that. It's just a very unusual karma that I've had. I think I'm through that. But I tell people, if you've ever seen me in nature, go like this and start backing away just to get a little bit of space. So when I stepped in quicksand, I started laughing because I knew that Divine Mother plays with this child in very funny ways, and sometimes she plays a little bit rough, but she never killed me, or hasn't yet. And so I was just laughing and thinking, well, what's this experience about? And I learned very soon what it was about. And because I know quicksand, you rarely die in quicksand. Usually you just hit solid ground and you're in the quicksand up to your calves or thighs, and you're like standing in cement. You just cannot get out. And so what I learned, and from my previous encounter with quicksand, because this was my second time in it, my friend Vidura, who many of you know, he was on solid ground, and I invited him to come over to help me get out. And for those of you who have been stuck in quicksand before, you will find that you cannot get out by yourself. You don't sink all the way down and disappear like in the movies, and your guy's hat is on the top at the end and his hand disappears. That doesn't really happen, but you are stuck. And I was stuck. And this is really, in a way, what brings many people onto the spiritual path and to asking God for help, is that people are stuck spiritually with their addictions, with their emotions, with their limitations. And finally, with the deepest sincerity and purity of heart, they pray to God. And Yoganandaji said that this is when God sends the Guru to help the person out of their delusion. And luckily for me, my Guru was there on solid ground. I was in my quicksand, and I called my friend over, and it took me trying as hard as I could, 100% of my effort, to get out of that quicksand. If I was just on my own, even that would not have been enough. It took my Guru on solid ground, free from the quicksand of delusion. It took him pulling me as hard as he could. And it took me cooperating with him, working with him, and finding leverage and finding ways to kind of pull me out. And with the Guru's help, I got out of that quicksand. And this, in a way, describes how this 25-25-50 formula works. It's not separate pieces, it's all one piece, and our work with the Guru is to cooperate with the Guru. And this is why we ask a lot of people, and our Guru, Yoganandaji, asked a lot of people when they came to the path of Kriya before they received initiation. He asked them to be doing energization exercises every day, and be practicing a regular sadhana and Hong Sa and Om technique, and be strong with your practices, because that's part of our 25%. And then the other parts are cooperation with the Guru's guidance, attunement to the Guru. And in the end, this attunement to the Guru is something that, again, any true spiritual path will have this deep attunement and the help of the Guru bringing us home. Paramahansa Yogananda, he gave a very good demonstration of the power of the Guru to help us find freedom. You remember an autobiography of a yogi. He decided to go to the Himalayas. He had had enough of ashram duties and ashram life and the discipline and all those things. And so he left his guru, Sri Yukteswar, to go up into the Himalayas and find God. And he was actually there quite a long time, from something Swami Kriyanandaji said. It wasn't just a brief period. And Master said, not in that book, but at other times, he said all he found in the Himalayas were sadhus fighting over blankets and food. And he didn't find any people of deep wisdom. So finally he realized that I need to go back to my guru, and this is really how I'm going to find liberation. And so remember, in that story, as part of that journey, he met another one of the very few liberated masters in Autobiography of a Yogi, Ram Gopal Mazumdar. And he asked him, will you give me samadhi? And he had the power to do that because he was fully liberated. And remember what he said. He said, I can't give that to you, your guru has to give it to you. But then he said, but I'll give you a little bit of sweets. Basically, he touched him, and Master had this experience of divine lightning. But remember what happened next, which is that Master went back to his ashram, to the Guru's ashram, and just days later, he was meditating upstairs in the ashram. And do you remember how he was meditating? He said he was meditating, his thoughts were all over the place, like leaves blowing in the wind. Has anyone else ever had a meditation like that? Well, it's so interesting that that's the moment, and that's the point, where his guru, Sri Yukteswar, called him, Mukunda, come down. Mukunda was meditating, and he was serious about it, and his mind was restless. And so Sri Yukteswar called him again, Mukunda, get down here. And Mukunda said, sir, I'm meditating. And Sri Yukteswar finally says, I know how you're meditating. Your mind's all over the place. And, you know, I have a feeling that Master demonstrated this for our education, that maybe his mind was restless roaming the cosmos or something like that, rather than our type of restlessness. But it's interesting that that's the moment that the Guru called him down and said, okay, I'm going to give you what you've been seeking, touched him on the chest, and he went into samadhi at that moment, and his life's seeking was finally fulfilled at that moment. And it's so interesting because, one, it came through the Guru. That's how it comes. And it's as Christ and John the Baptist, same thing. It was to fulfill all righteousness, that even Christ had a Guru. And same with Yoganandaji, he had a Guru. And it's also interesting that it was during a very restless meditation. It wasn't while he perfected his meditation finally that the Guru said, okay, you're through the door now and you can make it. It was when he went back to the Guru and just tried his best to meditate, restlessly as it was. But it was when he went back and was receptive to the Guru's blessings that he finally received the grace. There's a very interesting story, and I'm going to just touch on attunement to the Guru, because it's very important to understand that for all of us, the experience of samadhi and freedom is ultimately going to come through the Guru's grace and the Guru's touch. And so this means that whatever one's spiritual path, practice or teachings, do the techniques, but always do them with the awareness of the presence of the Guru. There's a story in the Mahabharata of a man named Eklavya, who he went to Dronacharya, the Guru, the archery and martial arts Guru of the Pandavas, and he went to Dronacharya to receive teaching in archery. And Eklavya was of a lower caste, and Dronacharya was higher caste, and said, no, I can't teach you, too bad. And there was a little bit of pride in Dronacharya in that regard, but Eklavya understood, and he went away. And then, sometime later, years perhaps, Dronacharya was with his star pupil, who he is very proud of, who was Arjuna, who was the greatest archer in the world. And they were out hunting one day, and they had some hunting dogs that were hunting some game, and they were shooting with the arrows. And the hunting dog went forward and was barking, and suddenly became very quiet. And so they thought, well, what's happening here? There must be some big animal or something. And they went up there, and this dog had 5 arrows woven around its mouth, holding its mouth shut to keep it from barking. And whoever had shot those 5 arrows to weave them like that, Dronacharya realized that there was an archer greater than his star pupil, who he was very proud of, Arjuna. And he thought, how could somebody be better than the best archer in the world, who I've been training all these years? And Arjuna also, who could be prone to pride at times, was kind of alarmed that suddenly there was a greater archer than him in the world. And they traveled down the trail, and they finally found Eklavya. And they asked him, where did you learn archery from? And Dronacharya asked him, who did you learn from? And Eklavya said, I learned from you, Guruji. And Dronacharya said, what are you talking about? I refused you as a pupil. And Eklavya explained that when he was refused, he went back home, and he created a clay murti of his guru, and he learned archery from that clay murti by tuning to his guru, Dronacharya. He would meditate before the murti. He would practice archery before the murti and ask Dronacharya, how do I do this and how do I do that? And because he had such deep attunement to the guru, he was able to become a great archer. And the rest of the story I won't explain because it's not a very pleasant story, the rest of it, but it shows something extremely important. People sometimes think, oh, it's too bad I wasn't around Paramahansa Yogananda when he was in the body, and Swami Kriyanandaji has left the body. But this story highlights something really, really important, that attunement to the Guru is not to the Guru's physical form, it's to the Guru's consciousness. And so whenever we practice these sacred teachings, whether you're a Kriya yogi or another path, practice them with a deep sense of attunement to the Guru's energy, to the Guru's power, and always feel that you're doing all these teachings with the Guru, and you will find that you are empowered so much more. It really, in the end, it's the Guru's power that gives us freedom. And a big part of our part, Yoganandaji even said that the 50% that is God's grace, he said most of that comes through the Guru also. So most of our effort, in a way, should be attunement to the Guru, but also part of that attunement, like I said earlier, and Shivani is going to touch on this some more, is practicing what the Guru has given us. Because if he gives us these sacred gifts, like the energization exercises, for example, and we don't practice them, then we start to cut off that attunement. We start to shut off that flow of divine grace. So now there's another aspect of this. This is the Guru's part. I'm also going to touch upon the part of devotion. Yoganandaji said, Kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. Swami Kriyanandaji said in his biography of Yogananda, which was written near the end of his life, he said something very interesting. He said that every Kriya, talking about the Kriya technique, every Kriya I see now should be an act of devotional self-offering. And this was after some 60 years of Kriya practice. And he wasn't saying that some Kriyas should be done that way, he was saying every single one should be done that way. It's interesting, the word Kriya, and I'll explain this in a second. The very word Kriya, as Yoganandaji explains in Autobiography of a Yogi, has the same root as the word karma. It simply means to act, it means action. And so Kriya is a very active technique in a way. It works with the action and movement of energy. But I was writing a Sanskrit expert about these two words because I knew that there had to be some difference between those two words. Because karma and action, it means the results of our past actions, good and bad. And Kriya has to be a little bit different. And he said that these two words do have the same root, which is action. But he said that in their application by these Sanskrit experts over the centuries, including the great guru of Sanskrit, Panini, he said that the word Kriya is applied in one different way. It's applied in many ways, but it's applied in one way that's distinct from the word karma. And it's applied in the sense of pure action. It's used in the sense of worship, of offering. And so Kriya is practiced that way. It's practiced as worship. It's practiced as offering. It's practiced with devotion. And what happens is that when we offer ourselves with devotion, we open ourselves to commune with and receive divine grace. And it goes even deeper than that. I asked Swami Kriyanandaji one time here in India, it was how to apply this towards the Guru. I had this sense that with the Guru, the reason we practice devotion to the Guru is that we're sitting in front of the Guru in meditation and we open our hearts, and it allows the grace of the Guru to enter ourselves through our open hearts. And this was the understanding I had, but I really wanted to be sure, because I understood that this is perhaps the most important thing on the spiritual path, is how we attune to the Guru. And he said, no, it's actually much more than that. He said that when you practice this meditation in the presence of the Guru and with your altar and the murti, as Ekalavya was doing, he said what you're really doing is that you're communing with him in a much deeper sense, in the sense that you and he are becoming one, your auras are merging, and in that inner communion, that union with the Guru, you are transformed by the power of his magnetism and grace. And in the end, there's no separation between you and the Guru. You're, in a sense, they're meditating and communing as one. This is the difference between, there's an English word, devotion, which we use a lot here, and our Guru used a lot. But the way that word is usually traditionally defined in English is very different from the word bhakti, which is, devotion is often used as a translation of the word bhakti, but there's a really important difference in their meanings, which is that devotion is traditionally more of the I and thou relationship. It's you and me, Lord, and I'm loving you and you're loving me, and there's a separation there. Bhakti, the root of that, which is bhaj, has much more of a meaning of doing it as one. Its participation is the interpretation of that. And so it's the gopis dancing with Krishna, it's the devotee being with the Guru as one, feeling your consciousness as one. And it's much more participatory, and there's no separation between you and the Guru. And this is what the deep devotion does, is that eventually it opens your heart, it opens your aura to actually merge with and become one with the power and the consciousness of the Guru. It's also interesting that the power of devotion really applies to everything on the spiritual path. It even interestingly applies to the other techniques. Swami Kriyanandaji said that he was describing the 4 techniques that all Kriya yogis should be doing every day: energization exercises, Om Sa, Om technique, and the Kriya technique. And again, this applies to anybody who practices different techniques of meditation. He said that each of these 4 techniques is actually a communion with some aspect of God. It's not just a technique that we're doing. He said energization exercises help us commune with God as energy. So try to see that practice not as just an exercise, but as actual divine communion. Swami Kriyanandaji said that one of his brother disciples, when they would energize together, he would shout really loudly while he was doing the double breathing. He would say, "Pump it in, Divine Mother, pump it in!" And he would really attune to God as energy. I find it very helpful. The time that I got hit by lightning one time, it was like receiving the Shakti pot of Divine Mother of the entire universe. And I can only say it was extraordinarily joyful, because I wasn't harmed by it. And I actually got hit twice in succession through my own stupidity. But I could not stop laughing for 15 minutes because there was such a joy and energy. And when I do energization, I try to do it with that extraordinary power of the universe, rather than just a little bit of my own meager willpower. So that's the energization exercises. Om Sa, commune with God as peace, as calmness. Om technique, of course, with the divine as cosmic vibration. And Swamiji said about Kriya Yoga, the technique, that it's communing with God as divine bliss. And so any technique, any true technique and teaching of yoga, any meditation practice should be done as a sense of divine communion. And you'll find that that's what really produces the greatest results, because you're tuning to that quality rather than just making a singular self-effort about that. Even, interestingly, the way that the technique burns up karma is also done with a sense of devotion. And I'm going to explain this in a different way, which it's interesting that the great mantra for burning up karma, which we practiced here on New Year's Eve, the Mahamrityunjaya mantra, I was interested to see 2 days later the crows were all eating the seeds of our past bad karma on the patio out there. So if you see crows acting erratically around here, they have eaten all our past bad karmas and are living them out perhaps. But even that mantra, the first part of that mantra is purely devotional. It invokes, I invoke thee, O three-eyed one, you, I worship you, I adore you, you who are most fragrant. And so most of that mantra is actually devotional worship of the Lord of Shiva. And then it says, come to me like a gardener severing the cucumber from the vine, separating my karma from my own bondage to that karma. And so devotion to the infinite paves the way, and it really, in a way, it allows God, it allows the Guru to really enter our lives, to enter our hearts, and to really, really change us. And finally, I'm just going to conclude by saying something Swamiji taught us. It's in his autobiography, The Path. He said that early in his time with Yogananda, he was struggling with a lot of challenges and tests. He said he was very intellectual and he was really having to make a lot of changes. And one day he was walking into the room from the back where Yoganandaji was talking to some of the monks. And he overheard Master talking about Swamiji. And I think he was obviously knew that Swamiji was entering, and so he chose to give Swamiji a message without being direct about it, because the message was rather direct in a way. And Swamiji knew that he was changing through what he was doing there in the Guru's ashram. But Yoganandaji said, describing Walter as he called Swamiji at that time, he said, look how I've changed, Walter. And Swamiji understood that, of course, all the changes that I'm making, that I think I am making, are really being made by the Guru. And they are made because I'm willing to work with him, to cooperate with him, to practice Guru Bhakti and Guru attunement. And really, in the end, it's the power of the Guru that changes us. And the path of Kriya Yoga, as a comprehensive spiritual path, works with all of these things, but with the Guru, in the end, being the prime piece that we all work with, cooperate with, love, and commune with. So let's take these teachings again as a comprehensive spiritual path. And now Shivani will be describing more about our effort, the devotees' part, and applying these things and practicing these things, because in a way, that 25% is 100% of our effort. It's not just 25%. And so really the path of Kriya, really to get the full greatest results, requires complete, wholehearted engagement in all these teachings and all these practices, and even satsang as we're doing today. So.
Why don't we have just a little stand up and stretch and movement break. Maybe we can just walk a little bit, do something nice for our lower back, some nice breathing. Nice to see you all who have come up from so many places. Huh? Nice deep breaths. Got some big smiles. A little affirmation. I am awake
and ready. I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready.
I am awake and ready. Nice big breaths. So let's start at the heart. Be careful with who's next to you. Maybe we'll do it like this. I just taught this in a cinema, and I changed it. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. So the first movement will be like this. Okay? So I am positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I am positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I am positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. Again, nice big breaths. Okay, please sit down. A disciple one time came to Master. He was lamenting, didn't feel as though he was making any progress. And he said to Master, I just have terrible karma. And he said it with an attitude of being an excuse. I can't do this because I don't have good karma. And Master did not console him. Master responded, remember this. You must have very, very, very good karma, Master was shouting, to even want to know God. All of us here, we are here because we want to know God. And we do have very, very, very good karma. And I think it's useful for us to appreciate the blessings that we have and how precious is our spiritual path and every one of those teachings. We know that Kriya Yoga as a science and an art was prevalent up until Kali Yuga. And then it was withdrawn. It was withheld because during the era of Kali Yuga, people's consciousness was not refined enough to understand the connection between willpower and energy. Everything was just very material and solid. And so the Kriya practice was withheld, but was practiced. It was practiced by yogis. It was practiced by yogis in the Himalayas, those people who were able to renounce everything, leave, and go off, dedicate their lives completely, entirely to their spiritual practice. And so the Kriya Yoga science was preserved, and it came back. It came back, as we know, through Mahavatar Babaji. Mahavatar Babaji brought Kriya Yoga back. He didn't invent Kriya Yoga. It's not the Kriya Yoga of Babaji. Babaji was the messenger. That's one of Babaji's missions, is to announce and to set into motion spiritual directions here on earth. He's one of the protectors of our planet. And even though very few people see him, he is very active in setting into motion many, many things. Not just through our masters, but through other masters and other paths, and possibly other religions as well. We tend to have, egoically, a proprietary attitude about our masters. This is our Babaji. You might meet somebody who says to you, I follow Babaji. Oh, but is it our Babaji? Who is our Babajis? So many saints and Babas are called Babaji, revered father. And we tend to think, that this is our Kriya and that our masters invented it. Did you ever see that movie? I don't know why I'm thinking of this. Called, what was it? The Big Fat Greek Wedding. Did anybody see that? Okay. Remember, one of the humorous things was that the father was always saying how all words were Greek.
Came from Greek.
They all came from Greek. So we think that Kriya Yoga comes from, just from our masters. But it's a gift. It is a universal gift. It has come to us, and it has come into the world at this time. What makes Kriya special? Is Kriya the only way that humanity can find God? What do you think? No. There are many paths to God. People are going into ecstasy. People are being realized. People are being illuminated through many paths and many religions. But Kriya is outstanding in one specific aspect. That through this technique, we are able to work on the karmas, the vrittis, the samskars, that will not become evident in our lives in this incarnation. All of us come with two kinds of karma. There's the prarabdha karma, those things which will germoyare, which will germinate, which will come into fruition, which will flower and blossom in this life. And those karmas we can work with. We become aware of them, and all of us have become aware of our imperfections, our deficits, the things that we're working on. This is the karma that presents itself in this life. And in terms of the entire body of karma that each soul brings with it, the prarabdha is very small. I mean, it's probably not even 1%. It's probably not even 1/100th of 1% of all the karma. If we think of the grains of sand, on a beach, and just picking up 1 or 2 of them, there's so much that's left. So Master said that in this incarnation, we will work on maybe 1 or 2 major karmas. And it will take us a lot of our effort and the help of the Guru and the grace of God in order to work on those. Now, this can be done, is being done through many paths around the world, because there are teachings and techniques that enable us to work constructively with the prarabdha karma. But what about the rest? Because it's hidden from us. We don't know about it. We might feel the effects of the samskars, but it's nothing we can get our hands on. I think in the path, Swami talks about one of his brother disciples who was coming to grips with the fact that there's so much karma to be worked out. And he was saying, if I could just get my hands on it. But we can't. We can't. It's subtle and it doesn't present itself. So Kriya Yoga is outstanding in that it reaches all, potentially, depending on how we practice it, all of those samskars, all of those traces, those tendencies, those energy patterns and thought patterns, all of the chains that bind to us can be affected by our practice of Kriya. We will never know what it is specifically that Kriya is freeing us from, but we will know by our own experience that we are becoming free. So, we are blessed. We have very, very good fortune. Because as Master said, if we practice with devotion and constantly and deeply and sincerely, we can be free in this lifetime. Free. Not just realized, not just illuminated, not just Jivan Mukta. We can achieve Kaivalya Moksha in this life. How many of us will do that? I hope all of us will do that. But how wonderful it is to know that we can do that. And if we don't do it in this life, it might take 1 or 2 more. We really don't have many lives. Because in order to be given this precious tool, we are already very well evolved, and there's not much that's left for us. So let's be grateful for this great gift. And let's receive it in its greatness, which is not like going to a doctor, getting a really good medicine, putting it in the medicine cabinet and leaving it there. And sometimes even forgetting that it's there. You know, you get sick and you're running around looking for medicine, and you go out to the pharmacy and there it was all the time, you know, because you were sick like that before. We don't want to do that with Kriya. We want to explore its potentials. We want to explode its potentials so that it really is working deeply for us. We want to get the most out of it. Now, Devarshi has so touchingly and beautifully talked to us about the importance of devotion, and that's one part of that formula. Kriya plus devotion. And I have no doubt that every one of you sitting here today is deeply devoted to these masters and deeply devoted to God. I'd like to say a few words about our masters, because sometimes we also take them for granted. Babaji is known as Mahavatar Babaji. He is the great avatar. He's the avatar of the avatars. And as I said, it is his mission to set into motion energies that have an impact all over this world. Babaji is known to only a few people. It was quite a long time until Master had a vision of Babaji. Do you remember when that was?
Before he was leaving for...
It was only before he was leaving for the United States. I mean, he had already been in Sri Yukteswar's ashram for 10 years before that time. But it was just at that moment that Babaji came and blessed him. Now, Babaji has given Kriya, as we know, to Kriya Mahashaya. And we're going to talk about that, so we can really appreciate the blessing that is for us. But is Lahiri Mahashaya Babaji's only Kriya disciple? No. Okay. And I just mention this so that we can not become sectarian. Babaji has initiated other people. Usually it's Himalayan yogis. And there are other lines of Kriya that come down from Babaji. Now, as Devarshi was mentioned, then we get into this internecine conflict amongst disciples and paths. Who has the best, my Kriya comes right from Babaji. Your Kriya just comes from Yogananda. There's a lot of Kriyas out there. And as long as each initiate is practicing the Kriya as it is given to him, with devotion to his Guru, you're going to be making a vow tonight. And perhaps this is the time to mention something about that vow. You will be promising to practice Kriya Yoga faithfully and regularly in the way it is taught to you. This is your commitment, this is your vow, this is your promise. You're not going to be looking to see, how do Babaji's direct disciples practice Kriya? What about Sri Yukteswar, all of the ones of Lahiri, and the others that are popping up all over the place? No. We practice Kriya because of our devotion, and because a great part of its power is in this. We practice in the way that it's given to us. There's a story that I've always loved. It was about a guru. This is the Ram Dass that lived centuries ago. And it's a similar story to the one of Eklavya. And there's a young boy, and he really wants to be initiated by Ram Dass. And he goes there and asks humbly for the initiation. And again, because he is low caste, Ram Dass says, I'm sorry, I can't. It is just against our tradition. Now, this young man was very determined. And we want to be very determined in our Kriya practice. So what he did, and you might know this story, is that every morning Ram Dass from his ashram would walk down the steps of the Ghat before first light, early in the morning at 4 o'clock, and take his bath, and then go back and do his practices. So this young aspiring disciple lays down against the step of the Ghat at night. So Ram Dass, when he comes down, he tramps on him, almost falls. And he's very upset, and he looks at him, he recognizes him, and he says, "Get out!" And so the disciple goes away. Now, some years later, that same disciple at the same place nearby in Benares is sitting, and there's a whole group of disciples around him. And Ram Dass's disciples go and say, "Master, there's this sadhu over there, and he's attracting a lot of people, and he's telling them all that he's your disciple. You should do something about that." So Ram Dass goes over, and he recognizes that here's this low-caste boy telling everybody that he's Ram Dass's disciple. And Ram Dass goes up and says, "You're not my disciple. I didn't initiate you." And the man says, "Oh yes, Guruji, you did. You gave me your touch and your blessing and the mantra." And he said, "Well, when did I touch you?" "When you tripped over me on the way to the Ganges." And he said, "Well, yeah, I remember that, but I never gave you a mantra." "Oh, yes, you did. You said, 'Get out.' And I took that as my mantra. And that's what I say to delusion, to Maya. Get out.
Get out.
Get out." And so he advanced spiritually because he had the touch and the technique from his master. Now, the rest of Ram Dass's disciples probably said, "That doesn't work. That's not a mantra. He's not really initiated," but it did work. So we practice Kriya in the way that it is given to us, and it's been given to us through Lahiri Mahashaya. What a great blessing! We wouldn't be here if it were not for Lahiri Mahashaya. Before Lahiri Mahashaya, Kriya Yoga was available only to those Himalayan yogis. And then at that meeting with Lahiri Mahashaya, which was in, help me, 1893, 96? 91? Anyway, way back there. Excuse me. Just at the very beginning of Dwapara Yuga, of the final, at the end of the Shandhya and the beginning of Dwapara Yuga. So Lahiri Mahashaya is a reflection of who we all are. He was married, he had children, he had a job, he had responsibilities, he had a past of being a realized master. And so Babaji gave the initiation to him. And through him, and Lahiri Mahashaya's prayer to Babaji, may I give this technique to all sincere truth seekers, and not only to those who are able to renounce everything. And Babaji said, the divine has spoken through your request. And he said, yes, you can give it to any sincere seeker. The initiation that Babaji gave to Lahiri Mahashaya was, I believe, a generic form of Kriya. All of the Kriyas that we have through Babaji's line and Lahiri's and Sri Yukteswar's and perhaps others, I don't know about them, they have certain things in common, and you're going to be learning about that this evening. It's a certain way of dealing with the movement of cosmic energy, within our body in order to reach those vrittis and those samskars. It's done in a certain, very specific, very scientific way. And this is common to all of the Kriyas. But it was Lahiri Mahashaya who became, in a way, the Manu, or the Patanjali of Kriya, in that he formulated what Babaji had given him into certain steps, certain stages of Kriya. And Lahiri Mahashaya, in his life, experimented with himself deeply with the practices of Kriya. He wrote about his experiences in 18 volumes of diary, and except for 2 of those diaries, which were stolen, they do exist. They're in Bengali, and they're in Benares at the moment. Many people have read them. Swami Kriyananda has seen them. People have commented on them, and there are books of commentaries of Lahiri Mahashaya's writings on Kriya Yoga. One little caution, the books that do exist are all commentaries on Lahiri's writings. And so they're coming through, they're filtered through other minds and other levels of realization. But Babaji formulated the Kriya into various steps. And we follow what we always call the Kriya Yoga of Lahiri Mahashaya of Benares. If there's a definition of our kind of yoga, that's it. Okay. We are disciples of Kriya through Lahiri Mahashaya of Benares. Now, Lahiri initiated thousands of people into Kriya. Most of them were householders. Many of them were renunciates, became swamis. But he is known as being the giver of Kriya Yoga to the householders. And there are whole communities that exist in Bengal of Kriya Yogis. And it's passed down from generation to generation. And I've come to know how those householders, the attitude and the devotion, the dedication with which they practice Kriya. A typical householder Kriya Yogi, disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya, goes about his daily life, works, earns money for his family, comes home, eats very light meal, and then for 10 or 12 hours he practices his Kriya. Sleeping only a very little bit. Practices all night his Kriya. A little bit of sleep, and then he goes to bed. So when we say that Kriya Yoga through Lahiri Mahashaya is also suitable, adapted for householders, let's remember that it doesn't mean that we just practice what I call survival Kriya. Just enough to get through the day, just enough to meet your challenges and keep a little centered. Now, Lahiri Mahashaya's intention was that we as householders with responsibilities, that we practice deeply. Maybe we can't practice 10 or 12 hours every night. Maybe we can give 1 hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours or 3 hours. But let's practice deeply when we do. It was given to Sri Yukteswar, amongst many others. Many of Lahiri Mahashaya's disciples were great. They're the ones who were liberated that are mentioned in the autobiography are, help me, Ram Gopal Muzumdar and Swami K. Kevalananda. I can't remember his Kevalananda. Okay, disciples of Lahiri Mahashaya. We see in the autobiography the great Pranabananda. Is he the Tiger Swami? Yeah, okay, great yogis, great Kriya Yogis. Why am I saying this? Because we need to become great Kriya Yogis. Not mediocre Kriya Yogis, not survival Kriya Yogis. It's up to us now to carry on this tradition. Not only us, there's others, but each one of us is a a messenger, a carrier of Kriya Yoga. So we want to practice well and aspire to become like these great Kriya Yogis. And Sri Yukteswar passed the Kriya Yoga down to Master. In that transition, there were modifications that were made. Some people say that Lahiri Mahashaya gave Kriya Yoga in a unique way to each disciple, very slightly modifying it for that disciple. I don't know if that's true. Sri Yukteswar being an avatar, made slight modifications in the way that Kriya was practiced, and he passed it down to Master, who gave the Kriya of Sri Yukteswar up until his later years, up until about the time when Swami came. And then he very slightly modified it to go back to some of the techniques of Lahiri Mahashaya. So actually the Kriya that we are practicing is the Kriya of Lahiri Mahashaya. And Yogananda came and brought Kriya to the Western world, knowing that it would go to the Western world and bounce back here to India, having been made practical, useful. Because who is able really, to spend those 10 or 12 hours every night practicing? So Yogananda Ji brought the Kriya and taught it in a way that we would be prepared to practice it. Devarshi has already mentioned the importance of the energization exercises. This is a special gift of Yogananda. Everything else that Yogananda has taught us comes from the tradition of Kriya Yoga, but not the energization. It was Yogananda who developed it. And why? What is so precious about the energization exercise? It teaches us to use the tool with which, in addition to devotion, we're going to do our Kriya. And that tool is willpower. He gave us the great aphorism, the great sutra: the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. And this aphorism applies to Kriya Yoga. What we do in Kriya is reflected in what we learn to do in the energization exercises. And we can continue to grow and deepen in our practice. I'm learning day by day and year by year more and more about the energization. It's endless, endless. I love the practice. It's not a practice to be say, oh, it's just an exercise, it's just physical. It's not. We learn to concentrate. We learn to isolate and find each muscle. And when we do our Kriya, we need to thread the Kriya current in a very specific way that requires willpower and concentration and visualization. Because Kriya is a science. It's a science that's practiced with devotion, but it is a science. It's like chemistry. If you mix together certain elements, you get a certain result. If you mix other elements, you get a different result. So there are many elements, you could say chemical, Kriya chemicals, and you're going to learn about them this evening. And all of them you already know from your practice of energization. Practice energization, do it well. Get the video of Swami Kriyananda himself teaching energization. Put it on, put it in your computer. I think we have it here. Put it in your computer, practice with Swami Kriyananda, and follow every one of his instructions, the intonation, the power with which he does it, the being centered, all of that. The other techniques are very important. Devarshi has already mentioned them. I'd like to add about the Hong Sa technique. Let us always keep in mind why we are doing each technique, what we hope to accomplish. In the energization, we're strengthening our willpower. We are strengthening our concentration. We are using our mind to move cosmic energy, to attract the energy and to move it into all of our body parts. What is our intention, our hope, the goal for Hong Sa? What would you say? Why do we practice Hong Sa? Yes.
Calmness, concentration, peace.
Calmness, concentration, and peace. All of these are important results. What else is there? Breathlessness. Thank you. Ratna. Breathlessness. This technique leads us to that pause between the breaths. That moment which exists in everything, every atom, every electron, neutron, nanoparticle is binary. And between one movement and the other, of binary motion, like a pendulum, there is a pause. The heart beats and it rests. It beats and it rests. Christ consciousness is the ability to catch the still moment between breaths and go on that wave into higher consciousness. Breathlessness. So when we practice, and we know that Master practiced up to 8 hours a day, can you imagine? He never said he practiced Kriya 8 hours a day, but he did say he practiced Hong Sa. So let's practice Hong Sa and go into breathlessness. Little breathlessness, maybe 2 seconds, 5 seconds, that gets longer and longer until we don't even know how long those pauses are. Communion with Om. That's the first level of samadhi. Samadhi is not far away from us. When we practice the Om technique, which was very much supported by Sri Yukteswar in his book, The Holy Science. When we practice the Om technique, that's the first touch of samadhi, to be one with the cosmic vibration. Om samadhi, Christ consciousness samadhi, cosmic consciousness. Those are the 3 levels of samadhi. So think about that when you practice the Om technique. And then you bring to Kriya all of the tools that you need. I'd like to speak for a moment, not about the Kriya practice itself, but our relationship with the Kriya practice. Like any practice, whether it's learning to play an instrument or any of our spiritual practices, or learning to cook or sing, the more often we do it and the more deeply we do it, the more quickly we progress. If you want to be a good pianist, would you practice once a week for a half an hour? If you want to be a prima donna ballerina, would you practice 1 hour a week? How many hours a day does a concert pianist practice? What do you think? 8, 9, 5, 6, 4. Ballerina? The same. Now they are dedicating themselves to an accomplishment in this physical world, and look at what they're giving to it. What about a tennis star? Does he practice? What about a Kriya yogi? Are we going to practice? Yes. Is our life going to change? Our life is going to have to change so that we will practice. I'll talk more about that this evening. But let's realize the great promise there is in Kriya Yoga. What is that promise? It's freedom. Freedom. For those who take the tool, take the gift, take the blessing. I mean, look at all of these masters. How much love and power and sacrifice. I mean, they incarnated Isn't that a big sacrifice? Just think about it. They came here on earth for us, to give us this technique. So let's receive it tonight, either for the first time or for the 100th time, realizing the blessing and the power that's in it. And let's come this evening with a determination. I will practice faithfully and regularly in the way that it is given to me.